this is a fundamental aspect of what I call Homo Mimeticus, this openness to mimetic pathos. And if I use the notion of sympathy, I use it in the etymological sense of sympathos, in a feeling way, and that's very close to empathy. But I also noticed in a lot of thinkers of mimetic that I study that in addition to this openness, we have this other movement, which is the ability to put ourselves at a radical distance from mimetic behavior, so that we don't resonate automatically with all kind of mimetic experiences. And I was wondering at the neurological level, what is it that allows for this kind of...
This is one of the aspects of our research which I found as the most difficult to communicate, because it is difficult in itself, and there are some paradoxical aspects. Because on the one hand, we speak of the immediacy of this mechanism, the unconscious nature of all this embodied simulation which is going on in our brain and in our body when we are confronting ourselves with the behavior of others. But on the other hand, there are strong, I don't like this special metaphor, but since everybody uses it to make myself understood, I will use it. So on the one hand, you have bottom-up, this proclivity to simulate what you see, but on the other hand, you have a braking system that prevents you to be turned into an ecopraxic individual. Actually, if you display ecopraxia, you're a patient. And this ecopraxia, quite often, that has been described by neurologists, stems from degeneration of the most anterior part of the frontal lobe. So the idea is that these mechanisms are constantly subjected to a top-down gating. And when this top-down gating and inhibition becomes less successful, is in the domain of emotion. If I see you grasping that sheet of paper, unless I'm an ecopraxic patient, I won't immediately reproduce, imitate what I see you doing. But if you start laughing, there are very good chances that my zygomaticus major will start to activate in a way which is beyond my control and of which I'm most of the time totally unaware. So mirroring comes in degrees. The aspect of behavior where this inhibitory control is less successful is that of emotion. In my experience, through the results of empirical investigation, in the domain of action, we do not automatically imitate unless we do it for the purpose of learning some skill. In that case, we are instructed to reproduce exactly what we see. So where to locate this control? Most likely the prefrontal cortex, through its input to the basal ganglia, plays a major role in refraining us from automatically imitating whatever we do. The same applies to our relation to manipulable objects. We discovered, before mirror neurons, a class of premotor neuron that we later designated as canonical neuron that control the execution of goal-related grasping behavior, grasping object, manipulating object, placing object. It was discovered that the very same neuron that controls the grasping of the object can be activated also by the mere observation of that object, even when you don't have any purpose of actually interacting with the object. So this activity is a simulation of the movement that you do not perform. So the movement is actually inhibited, but this motor simulation is part of the neural mechanism that contribute to give a meaning to that object. So that object, it is the object that it is, be it a bottle, a glass, a cup, a fork, a hammer, whatever, not just because of its size, of its shape, but also for its pragmatic intrinsic value. And the pragmatic value, meaning of the object, is the outcome of a motor simulation. There are neurological diseases in which if you put a comb in front of the patient will automatically grab it and start combing his or her hair. It's called utilization behavior. Again, you see a motor simulation no more inhibited, which is turned into ostensive behavior. But it's a pathology. We normally don't do that.
Interesting. So there is then at the level of the brain a mechanism, call it bottom up and top down, that allows for this oscillation between mimetic and anti-mimetic tendency. That's very interesting because I found it as a pattern.
I mean, there are also social influences that at the end are all funneled into our brain. So certain types of behavior are perfectly legitimate in certain culture, like make noises with your mouth when you eat noodles in a Japanese restaurant. I lived in Tokyo for 2 years. At first I was a bit kind of surprised to hear all these noises, and they actually don't refrain from doing it because they claim that by doing these noises you are in a better position to appreciate the taste of the soup. On the other hand, I immediately realized that you don't want to blow your nose with a tissue on the subway because immediately everybody will stare at you. It's far more conventional and according to the social etiquette to do, which is, I mean, as a child you are taught you don't want to do this. You have to blow your nose with a tissue, or so you see. We are social creatures, so much of our behavior is shaped by mimesis, which enables you to perform like the other do. But this mimetic behavior is in turn the outcome of cultural habit and social practices. So the body is always the protagonist, but what the body expresses is in turn governed, ruled, dictated by what the bodies of others are doing, what we call social practices. So it's always a sort of chiasmatic relationship between my body and the body of others. And this mechanism, the mechanism we have been discussing so far, in my opinion, you can't get away with them to understand what's going on with the social dimension of human beings.
Absolutely, and now I think you provided a perfect transition to my next question. Because in the humanities, very often one of the fears is that when we're dealing with human behavior is that it's reductionist or essentialist. And you already explained many times that you don't consider that mirror neurons have agentic properties, so they're not cognitive in themselves, they operate at a personal level.
Yeah.
But you were introducing now the role of context and culture.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, since you also speak of a certain plasticity of the mirror neuron system, if you could speak more about the way culture can shape the mirror neuron system, maybe epigenetically as well.
Indeed. Well, let me first make this statement, which at first sight might sound a bit rude, but I mean, we are both, since many years, engaged in a multidisciplinary take on our specific field of investigation, which in your case is literature, cinema, philosophy. In my case, is the brain and the body. In order to do so, we had to study a lot. We needed to become acquainted with traditions of thought which are not naturally part of our original background. You studied mirror neurons, I studied René Girard, Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, and I could continue. This enterprise takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. The vast majority of our colleagues don't want to do this. So they think they can deal with people like us who have tried hard to see things from a variety of perspectives, moving from the conviction, from the idea that each singular perspective adds to the picture, enriches the picture, and since we are dealing with complex issues, who we are, what does it mean being human, that requires a complexity of approaches. Most people don't want to do this because they are lazy or because they are moved by power feelings. They must plant their flag and defend it. It's my garden, it's not yours, so who cares? So this reflex like that I experienced so many times when I'm interfacing with people in the humanities, oh, you're a mechanistic, you are a reductionist, these mechanisms are reflex-like, they have nothing to do of culture. These are shortcuts. What really surprises me, to use a gentle term, is the fact that most of these people have a very superficial knowledge of what we are talking about. They never read a neuroscientific paper. At best, they read the titles, or the abstract, most of the time misunderstanding the content. So they are talking about something they really don't know. And so it's easier to wipe out of the table cognitive neuroscience by saying, yeah, it's mechanistic, it's reductionist. Of course we are reductionist, but in a methodological sense. I owe this distinction many years ago to my friend, philosopher Thomas Metzinger. I think it's a very useful distinction between methodological and ontological reductionism. I cannot be an ontological reductionist because as a neuroscientist, I'm the first to know that what's going on inside here is just spiking neurons, electricity phenomena. So neurons don't think, don't imagine, they don't experience emotion. Nothing of this vocabulary can be attributed to neurons. Neurons either fire or do not fire. And when they fire, they can modulate the frequency at which they produce spikes, period. All this vocabulary, as you said, refers to the personal level of description, which includes the neurons, the liver, the heart, the breathing, what we can do, the world to which we adapted, the physical reality. We have the force of gravity. It's not coincidental that we developed a spatial metaphor, so up is good, down is bad, and I could continue. So we are embedded in a physical world which provides a series of constraints on the way life develops on our planet. First element. Second element, the brain is fully integrated within the entirety of our body, and the more we study the brain, the more we discover how this intertwining, how this integration affects the way the brain reacts, what we designate as external stimuli. So there are more and more neuroscientists, myself included, that are studying the interplay between the heart and the brain, between the brain, the heart, and the breathing system. So, and a few people intuited, even within the West, Kurt Goldstein is one example, not coincidentally, very influential to Maurice Merleau-Ponty. They presented this moralistic scenario almost a century ago. If you move to the Oriental tradition, holism is the rule of the game. And I think that moving from a completely different background with completely different tools and way of asking questions to human beings, we will converge with the Oriental tradition. We don't speak of chakra, we don't speak of meridians, we have a totally different cartography, so to speak. But the more we investigate the brain in relation to the body, the more we envisage the brain not as a magic box in which all kind of wonders, but just as a part of the body, the more we envisage how fully integrated it is with the rest of the body. And this is one of the reasons why I don't speak of the brain anymore, but I always speak of the brain-body. The brain-body is a unity.
And in the context of this brain-body unity, then experience, you already mentioned, experience seems to play an important role in shaping
yes.
the plasticity of that neuron network.
And in that respect, I don't know if you read recently in the media, there was 25 years later, philosophy beat science 1-0. There was a bet in Tucson in 1998, and I was there at this conference, international conference towards the science of consciousness. The philosopher was David Chalmer, and the neuroscientist was Christoph Koch. So Christoph Koch said, in 25 years, I'm pretty sure that we will solve what Chalmers defined as the heart problem, namely how out of these billions of spiking neurons experience is generated. Well, 25 years later, we don't know yet. So this remains an unsolved mystery. And it is not foreseeable whether and when this mystery will be solved. So that's why I think that tackling human behavior from the vantage point of experience is so important. It has been done for another apparent transcendental entity, which is space, which is by no means transcendental, but it's the outcome of the relation of our body to the world. So we don't speak of space anymore, but we speak of peripersonal space, extrapersonal space, space being marked by the brain in egocentric coordinate, in allocentric coordinate, and I always resisted to the idea to deal with consciousness with a capital C, but to unpack, reduce the complexity of the term methodologically into more manageable entities. I think this methodology, to come back to your question, this methodological reduction is the only possible strategy for someone who wants to do empirical science. The trick is to go back to the personal level and see what and whether we have learned something about the questions that were formulated at the personal level, going through this methodological reduction, which is asking questions to the brain, to the heart, or to the body, broadly speaking.
Within this context, for instance, it has been shown that experience, let's say, with sports, if somebody is a dancer or if somebody is a soccer player, the neurons will activate differently depending.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that mirroring mechanisms are the outcome of who you are, which in turn can be translated in the type of experiences that you had in your life. So if you are trained as a classic ballet dancer, the mirroring mechanisms respond more vigorously to classic ballet than to capoeira, and vice versa. If you are a professional capoeira dancer, you see the reversal of the intensity of the activation, and both respond more heavily than a naive observer who doesn't know how to dance. So it's the experience, it's the life experience that literally mold in a plastic way the way these mechanisms are functioning.
And so in a way then it's the opposite of an essentialism.
Of course. To me, the only essential thing that I cannot reduce to something simpler is the body. So I don't think I will give up to the body. I can give up to a more traditional notion of representation, although I resist to the idea that we can get away with something that in another domain can be defined as a representation. For example, I think you can speak of representation not just in linguistic terms, but also in bodily terms. You don't want to call it representation? Okay, let's call it mapping. You can come up with different, but there must be something that kicks in also when there's nothing out there. For example, when you imagine something. So imagination is another form of simulation.